Okay, boys, here we go. We got another story of the origins of Larry Yatch and SEAL team leaders. I am your guide today, Dan Zehner. Glad to be with you again. Welcome once again, Larry. Good to be with you, buddy.
I know it's good. As we went through the last story, this was something that's been requested many, many times from all the people that follow us and all our students. And it was exciting to start last time. I'm even more excited to continue on the journey and continue to go through this epic story of not only the teams that I was on, but how we created what we're doing now. So yeah, this is awesome.
Yeah, I just love all your stories, but the ones that we're going to be talking about today are some of my favorites. So, to recap, last time we went through how you were bullied as a kid, all the way through the things that you developed within yourself as ways of being that allowed you to get into the Naval Academy to succeed and excel there, and then now we're starting your journey into the teams. So that starts with BUDS. So what is BUDS in a nutshell for the three people who haven't heard of it?
Yeah, exactly. So BUDS stands for Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training. The SEALs have been around in their present form since the late 60s, and they were in two other forms, the Naval Combat Demolition Units and the Underwater Demolition Teams, UDT teams, that were both created in World War II. And the UDT teams stuck around, were still around till the early 80s. I think it was 1983 was when they were finally consolidated into just the SEAL teams. So Naval Combat Demolition training was the precursor to BUDS and was held in Fort Pierce, Florida, prior to it moving to Coronado, California. And what's amazing is that some of the traditions, some of the training that was established back during World War II are still held today, such as the work with the logs, the work with the boats, IBS boats, inflatable boats, small. The only reason they're created in the world is for BUDS, for SEAL training. Like, there is no other use. They're completely outdated, non-useful platforms other than for the torture of guys that want to be SEALs. So the use of IBS boats, Hell Week in its present format slightly different, but the same concept was held in the Naval Combat Demolition / UDT training. So really long history of training, and what it is the basic training to become a SEAL. And training, I think, is a misnomer in that, yes, there is some training, but mostly it's just torture. So it would be the basic torture required to be able to produce really it's a tryout. It's a 6-month tryout. And then from there you get into being able to get trained in advanced training to qualify as a SEAL. But every SEAL that is alive, that has ever served, has been through BUDS. And it is a very proud moment and a huge accomplishment for most SEAls. Like your BUDS class number, something you're never going to forget. It is one of the biggest achievements you can do.
How many out of your class, actually what class were you in, and how many of that ended up completing and securing?
So I graduated from the Naval Academy in the spring of 1998, and I chose to be in a winter class, which ours was the second to last winter class ever held. What we meant by winter class is that we started in mid to late September, and we ended in I think it was late April, early May. So it's just really cold, right? You start in the fall, it just gets colder and colder. Our Hell Week was in late November, just before Thanksgiving, which is a cold time. And then our dive phase was in January in San Diego. So it's just it's a rough time to go through training. They actually stopped holding winter classes because the attrition rates were so high. They were significantly higher than a normal class. Our class was class 222, so 2 is one of my favorite numbers.
Nice.
The class I started with was the class I finished with, so I made it straight through in 6 months. And we started with 135 trainees, and we graduated 11 of those original 135 guys. So
Googly.
yeah, so less than 10% of the people that started the training finished the training with us. And those type of attrition rates are much higher. So the normal attrition rate is around 80%. So anywhere from 75 to 80%. Having an attrition of over 90 is quite high for a class.
Wow. Like, so what were some of the things that you had to do? Some of those evolutions that they put you through, those torture chambers.
Yeah, it's what's interesting for now, right? So I was, let's say, researching this or wanting to do this in the early to mid 90s, and there was hardly any information about SEAL training. There were 3 books. There was a bunch of fiction books from World War II and Vietnam. You could find some history of SEALs and UDT in action, but there's very little about the training. There was one book, I remember when I was at the Naval Academy, there was one book that covered training, and it was one chapter. There's one chapter in one book that talked about all of BUD/S. And now it's the opposite, right? You asked this, but I mean, there's the forging of class 239, which was a class of one of my buddies from the Naval Academy. Discovery Channel followed that class through most of the training. It was like a 10 or 12 part series. So there's tons of information now about it. I mean, shows and books and all sorts of stuff.
Courses on how to prepare for it. Like, I've gone through the 8 weeks to SEAL Fit program, like, baby BUD/S prep, like.
Oh yeah, there's all these programs you can go and simulate it if you want to experience what it's like. So I think there's a lot more knowledge now than when I went in. I mean, just when I went in, there was nothing. Like, you hardly knew anything. And there's a couple of big evolutions that people know about. Obviously, you've got the boats, these IBS boats. So they're 300 pounds dry weight, but then you add sand and water, so you're talking 450 pounds. And for the first phase of training is broken up into 3 phases. Your first phase, second phase, and third phase. And second phase is diving, third phase is they call it land warfare. So you're learning how to shoot and doing basic tactics. And you spend almost a month out at San Clemente Island working on that. First phase is really just an ass beating over and over again. And that it lasts for 2 months long. And one of the big events in there is Hell Week. So Hell Week starts, when I went through it, it was the 5th week of training. So you would have been in for just over a month. And then that starts, for us, it started Sunday afternoon, and it's constant physical activity. You're constantly wet, constantly being yelled at. You're constantly doing something difficult until Friday afternoon. So from Sunday afternoon to Friday afternoon, generally you get a chance to sleep Wednesday night for anywhere from 20 minutes to 40 minutes, and then the same opportunity sometime Thursday. So in a total of those 5 days, you might get an hour's worth of sleep. And when I say chance, like, this would have been late November in San Diego, which is cold, rainy, wet, windy. The chance we got to sleep on Wednesday was in an open-sided tent on cots, soaking wet with no blankets.
Yeah.
So, and even that, you're so exhausted. Well, you're so exhausted, you sleep, but then you wake up, your hip flexors cramp because you're shaking you're so cold, you're shaking so hard in your sleep, you can't stand up straight. It was one of the worst experiences of my life, of having to wake up and then go right from, imagine waking, if you've ever been camping, you kind of wake up cold and damp. Imagine that times 10, and then immediately having to go and lay in 50-degree water for 2 to 3 hours. So the coldest you've ever been, wake up the coldest you've ever been, and then go lay in freezing ass cold water
So,
for 3 hours.
so what like mindset or particular level of and flavor of crazy that you are, do you have that just helped you to get through that?
Like you said, flavor of crazy. One of the things I always say, the most common thread among all SEALs is you can't be right in the head. You got to be not right. Be based on the fact that the choices that you make are choices that normal people would say no to. When I was going through training, we were averaging 1 death a year in buds, which they've gotten is better now. It's now I think they're doing 1 death every 3 years or 4. But even when you think of those odds, you're only probably putting 400 people through training a year. So you're like 1 in 1,200 chance. And when I was going through, it was a 1 in 300 chance of dying in training. And you had a 100% chance of getting hurt. Like at some point, you're going to suffer some injury. There's not any time where someone made it through training unscathed. Now, it's just a matter of how bad you get hurt and can you keep going.
Yeah.
And this concept of you can't be quite right in the head is key, but the most common theme, and this is a requirement, like this isn't something that is optional. If you're going to make it through training, you have to have significant ability to self-regulate. And generally, that level of self-regulation has to have been created early on in your life, and generally by some sort of trauma. Because it has to be the normal human development has to take a left turn somewhere. And that can be either over time or generally it's, if you talk to a SEAL long enough, you're going to identify what point in their early life were they called upon to exhibit a high level of mental, physical, or emotional self-regulation, and to build that into them and allow them to build up that skill set before they show up. Because if you show up to buds without already having that excessive, uncommon level of self-regulation, you're not going to make it through. Like you're not going to build that there. It takes time. And so for me, from the story before, it was emotional self-regulation from being bullied, right? When I learned at that young age that showing emotions was dangerous, regardless of what interaction I had with the kids, if I was getting picked on or made fun of, I would restrict or regulate my emotional response. And that practice over time is what built up my ability to self-regulate. I know guys that, one guy grew up on a dairy farm, and when he was, I think he was 12, they got a disease that went into their herd and they lost 80% of their herd. So they lived in absolute, poverty and squalor and hardship for years. Other guys, dad was an alcoholic, right? So every day he came home, he didn't know, was he going to get beat on? It's these type of things at a young age that require significant self-regulation that when then directed in the right area can be very useful, right? Some people take those traumas and use it as an excuse to not be productive. We as SEALs take those traumas and leverage them for exceptional performance. Okay, so we're going to take a break here in this story. We're trying to keep these to 15 minutes piece, and this one's going to go for a solid half an hour. As you could imagine, the Buds experiences all sorts of good information. So with this, we're going to pause here, and part 2 is going to be coming out soon. So be sure to join us back to hear the rest of this story, because there's some really good stuff to come.